I think where you started to lose some people when you were talking to Piers Morgan is when we go into this issue of to defend ourselves from from the government, which may become tyrannical. I understand that in a theoretical world this is possible, but I think you lose a lot of people when you go into that argument. That doesn't appeal to as many people as I respect the Second Amendment.
Well, I agree, but the problem is this, and this is really the fundamental issue, and this is why I went there with Piers.
In this video, Ben Shapiro completely folds after facing David Pakman. We're looking into a debate that honestly went way worse for Ben than he probably expected. Usually super quick and confident, but the second Pakman just starts calmly pressing him, Ben's whole vibe shifts on this topic, and his answers just start getting all over the place. Pakman isn't even gonna come at him that hard. He's just gonna stay cool and logical, and it just completely exposes how shaky Ben's points really are here. The more Ben talks, the deeper he digs, and you can just see those little moments where he knows where he's losing room, but he just keeps doubling down on him. So make sure to watch till the end to see how Ben Shapiro completely folds after facing David Pakman.
I think it is very, very, very important that when we say that we support the Second Amendment, we understand why we support it. And people on the left, many of them, and it doesn't have to be a left-right issue, but the folks who are pro-gun control, they say they support the Second Amendment, but then they can't explain why they don't want a blanket gun ban. And you saw that with Piers, that he wouldn't come out in favor of a blanket handgun ban. Now, every justification that he had used for, banning, for example, AR-15s is doubly true with regard to handguns. But he wasn't talking about that. And so, all I want from the left is a cohesive, I know why I defend the Second Amendment. I really do. I do defend it on the basis that the founders defended it, which is that an armed population is the best guarantee against tyranny. But, if you don't agree with that, then I think that it's important for people to say you're a Second Amendment, articulate the rationale behind why you defend the Second Amendment. Why is it good for people to own guns? Because for Piers Morgan, later in that same show after I left, he admitted it, that if he had his druthers, he would get rid of all guns on American soil.
Yeah, the only thing is that Justice Antonin Scalia has said a lot of the same things that Piers Morgan has said. I think that we get a little muddled when we talk about exactly what the founders intended, because let's be honest, everything was very different when the founders wrote that Second Amendment. So I don't know that just saying I don't like the focus on the commas in the Second Amendment, so to speak.
Well, but no, I don't think that's true, though. I think that the Second Amendment is largely about human nature. And the fact is that we have seen tyranny on American soil. I mean, we had 120,000 Japanese folks who were imprisoned during World War II. We had Jim Crow in the South for 100 years. We had slavery in this country for 80 years after the Declaration of Independence. So, I think that it's a mistake to imagine that democracy, the best guarantee, I mean, if you read the Second Amendment, it's not about the commas. The Second Amendment is very clear on why it's there, right? I mean, it says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the preservation of a free state. I mean, that is the point. The free state is the point, is that and a well-regulated militia meant every person age 16 to 45. I mean, that's in U.S. code.
So right out of the gate, Ben's trying to frame this whole thing like if you support the Second Amendment, you have some deep old school reason for it. And honestly, sure, it's not the worst point ever. But where Ben just totally fumbles is where he acts like this is the only reason for it. Like, if you don't believe the Second Amendment is about, rising up against tyranny with rifles or whatever, you're just basically clueless. And that's where Pakman steps in. He brings up Scalia, not exactly a left-wing hero, but basically backing up a lot of what the gun control side argues. Which is just so funny because it shows that it's not just crazy liberals questioning where the line should be drawn. Pakman also makes another really good point. It's not 1789 anymore. We're not out here dueling with flintlocks and powdered rigs. Acting like the founders meant for us to walk around today strapped with whatever military gear we can just grab is just that's just goofy. Pakman doesn't get sucked into all this look at this comma nonsense either. He just keeps it all about reality, right now.
Where do you draw the line on what specifically in terms of arms and weapons are allowed? In other words, my interpretation, and this may be not nuanced enough. I say there are kind of two options in my mind. Either it applies to the weapons that were available when the Second Amendment was written, or there are absolutely no restrictions, and this goes to shoulder-mounted RPGs and everything. And let me just finish my thought here. If we are able to draw lines somewhere, the lines that the NRA wants to draw are no more or less legitimate than the lines President Obama or Dianne Feinstein may want to draw.
It's a disagree with that. And the reason I disagree with that is because I think that you can draw lines based on the principle. Now, the Second Amendment was not written for muskets. It was, and proof is in the pudding. If we're going to be that literal about the Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment says arms, it doesn't say muskets. If we're going to assume that it just meant stuff that happened at the time, then Piers Morgan has no right to be on TV because there were no TVs in 1789. And the freedom of the press doesn't use a printing press. So, I mean, as long as we're going to go there, we may as well go all the way. And that's
so then where do we limit to RPGs or nuclear arms? Those are arms, right?
No, they're not actually. If you look at the Second Amendment doesn't guarantee your right to own a warship, right? It doesn't guarantee your right to own a cannon. Even back.
But hold on a second. One of the main tenets of those who are constitutionalists is that the Constitution only says what you can't do, and the Second Amendment doesn't say you can't own a warship.
No, correct. No, the Second Amendment. No, that is true. The Second Amendment doesn't
negative,
say that.
Right. So in other words, it's not actually. You're wrong on that.
It prevents the government from infringing in areas where it says that you can't infringe. So that is actually this was the argument about the Bill of Rights at the time. Actually, the Bill of Rights are kind of different from the rest of the Constitution in that they carve out areas that the government cannot go. That's why there was argument about the Bill of Rights. The Constitution is a document of negative liberties. The Bill of Rights is also a document of negative liberties, but it carves out actual spaces where government can't go. That's why, I mean, you know this. This is why there was the debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists said there's no point to a Bill of Rights. It actually infringes our liberty because it says to the government that it can go all these other areas. The Second Amendment said when it says that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, it also it doesn't. First of all, the Second Amendment applies to the federal government, not to the states. But that is a huge thing that has been overlooked in constitutional history. But even assuming that it applies to the states, the fact is that the state has always had and always did have the ability to prevent private citizens from owning cannon. I mean, there were laws on the books when the Constitution was written preventing people from owning certain types of weaponry.
So the argument you're making now is actually that the Second Amendment does not prevent anybody from owning warships, but it's the states superseding that Bill of Rights that would allow them to prevent someone from owning a warship. That's getting a little muddled, right?
It also just keeps getting messier and messier, and not in a good way for Ben. Like, Pakman just brings up a super real point. Where exactly do we draw the line on weapons? If you're gonna say the Second Amendment is absolute, does that mean we can get RPGs, nukes, or whatever? It's not even that crazy of a question when you think about it. And Pakman just lays it out clean without sounding extreme. And right away, Ben tries to do a thing where he acts like asking about limits is just silly. He pulls out the old, well, if we take everything literally, Piers Morgan should be on TV because there were no TVs in 1789. Like, dude, come on. That's just such a bad faith move. Freedom of the press evolving into modern media is just not even close to the same as deadly military-grade weapons becoming available to random civilians. Pakman calls it out without even needing to yell. He just keeps poking at the logic until Ben just starts tripping over himself. Pakman just keeps it all real. It's super muddy, and no matter how many fancy phrases Ben throws out, he can't really explain where the actual line should be. It just feels like a big shrug covered in constitutional buzzwords.
It's not, though. I mean, that's correct. The Second Amendment doesn't prevent you from doing anything. I mean, the First Amendment doesn't prevent you from doing anything.
So you're okay with the states drawing the lines on what guns you can have, but not the federal government?
It's a restriction on government, right? I mean, the Second Amendment is not created as a restriction on individual. It's not a law about what guns you can and cannot own. It's a restriction on what the state can do. And what it says that the state can do is it says that the state is not allowed to infringe your right to bear arms. Now the question becomes, what is the definition of arms, right?
So I think most likely, this is interesting because we could probably go on 20 more minutes and we probably wouldn't come to an agreement on this. But I think this is really, we were doing fine agreeing on a lot of stuff until we got to this. And I think this is where a lot of people are getting lost also, I think.
It's a very simple argument from my point of view, and that is, that people, if they have the right to bear arms in order to prevent tyranny, then that goes for arms to prevent. That goes to the ultimate limit of that is the arms necessary to prevent. Basically, you can own any arm that is necessary, not to prevent tyranny.
Well, this is good because in Waco, Texas, the government used tanks. Isn't it then reasonable to say people need tanks because they were used in Waco, Texas?
Because this is the balance that we draw, right? And this is true for all legislation.
It's totally subjective, though, Ben.
totally subjective. The fact is that if you disarm a population of rifles, there is no chance that it could be a popular resistance to tyranny, period.
And if you only give them rifles and the tanks roll out, the rifles are useless.
True. It's just not true. I mean, I've spoken to veterans at the War College who have done studies of what would happen in case of an armed insurrection in the United States. If the American population is armed with semi-automatic rifles, the Army cannot handle them. Now, God forbid it should ever come to that point, obviously, and I don't think we're near that point now. But the argument that you need tanks in order to resist tyranny is not true. And obviously the menace to public safety provided by tanks is significantly higher than the menace provided by a semi-automatic rifle, which, as you said, is not really the main threat in gun violence anyway.
And wrapping this up, it's super clear Ben's argument is just spinning in circles. He just keeps calling it simple, but even admits it's totally subjective. Pakman catches it perfectly. If the rules change based on feelings, there's no real clear principle. Like Ben just keeps pretending there is. You can tell Ben's reaching too, pulling out that War College story like some last-ditch trust me experts agree move. Meanwhile, Pakman's the one actually staying steady and showing how messy the logic gets when you really break it down. And honestly, it's the same problem you see with a lot of these so-called debates. It's all about throwing buzzwords and slogans, but when you actually slow it down and look at the logic, it just doesn't hold up. It's all surface level, no real answers underneath. That's the kind of thing you get from biased news sources too. All noise and no real depth. Which reminds me, are you getting tired of getting news from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite? How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, whether it's left, right, or center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get a 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights in media bias and political trends. So stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.